The following data file contains information regarding the planet Eox, 8th planet in the Galarian system. Eox is primarily home to intelligent undead with a few sparse regions that could be considered fit for the living. This entry will touch on important events pre- and post-Gap Eox, archaeological findings, Eoxian society, and its dealings with the greater galaxy. As always, if the information you're looking for isn't contained in this log, feel free to search our archives, or simply ask and I will do my best to see what I can find. Millennia before the Gap, and the planets of the Galarian system took to the stars, the planet Eox was a lush world brimming with life, dominated by the human-like species known as the Elebrains. These Elebrains were gifted with an expansive knowledge of magic and technology, but also vanity and hubris. Archaeological surveys into the philosophical and religious writings across multiple planets have tracked Eox's retrograde orbit and marked it as an ill omen. For at least 2 planets within the system, this omen turned out to be more than simple superstition when Eox attacked the worlds known as the Twins, decimating them with their ancient and massive superweapon, sundering the Twins into what is now known as the Diaspora. The firing of Eox's massive superweapon also blew a hole in Eox's own crust, set its atmosphere ablaze, dried its seas, and annihilated many of their own cities. This act of mass genocide gained Eox a long-standing enemy in the Saracens, the former inhabitants of the Twins, who now take up residence chiefly in the Diaspora. Only a few thousand of Eox's citizens survived the initial destruction of their world, and those that survived did so in technologically advanced and enchanted bunkers. These bunker complexes still exist and function to this day, and they are one of the few places that you can find living Elebrains. Eox's weapon firing also caused the widespread infertility from the resulting radiation. To continue the survival of the species, the most powerful spellcasters, known as Bone Sages, turned to necromancy, believing undeath would allow them salvation from the consequences of their atrocity, and continue dominion over their newly inhospitable world. A number of these Bone Sages still hold power on Eox today. What remains of Eox's geography can be cataloged in its most notable landmarks, the relative safe zones, outside of those shielded with magic. The Etruscan Shelf is all that remains of the continent of Etruskia, the largest landmass on Eox. The area is raised above the now dried seabeds, and is somewhat less toxic than the rest of Eox. However, it has a myriad of radioactive zones of its own. Demonas Hollow, a lowland stretching through the planet's crater in what was the Demonas Ocean, is largely unclaimed by any of Eox's Bone Sages. The settlements found in Demonas Hollow have stronger and taller walls for defense, and the surrounding walls are deemed unsafe, even by the undead. Eox's atmosphere is still poisonous, radioactive, and unchecked magics which shielded the planet's few survivors of Eox's desolation creates an environment inhospitable to most living creatures. Wild magics and radioactivity has caused mutations in the few remaining native flora, which have evolved to survive on radiation from the wounded world's volcanism. Along with mutated plants, strange animals such as the gargantuan Elikoth, glass serpents, and roaming hordes of aggressive undead haunt the wilds of Eox. While some would claim these dangerous and hostile creatures as abominations, they do serve a purpose in Eox's new ecosystem, creating a buffer between rivaling territories and discouraging uprisings which would take hold in the wilds of a more hospitable planet. This treacherous terrain and history of planetary annihilation contributes to Eox's feared reputation, even among other planets of the Packworld Alliance. One can hardly speak of the natural sights of Eox without noting the Falconora Basin. Hundreds of miles deep and thousands across, this basin cuts close to the planet's core and churns with lava and toxic gases as a result. An incredibly dangerous reason, the basin is separated from most travelers by a ring of mountains called the Fringe. In pre-Gap Eox, the Falconera Basin was created in the same catastrophe which ravaged Eox's ecosystem. It has long since been inhabited by hungry ghosts, killed by the cataclysm and cut off from the River of Souls, by the violence of their deaths. These hungry undead, glass serpents, and strange creatures bred by the highly radioactive region is skirted by even the mighty bone sages. However, despite this peril, the Falconera Basin still sees visitors. Some seek the noteworthy life forms and track how they've adapted to Eox's new environment. Others study the fallout, and still more seek ancient and powerful relics said to wait within. While an impressive region, the Falconera Basin only houses one major settlement, the Pyre. To escape the local Elokoths, one can find relative safety in the southern cap, known as Grey Hollow. A few settlements of undead dot this region, and there is a variety of plant life to be found here. It is a place of great curiosity that is deserving of study even among Eox's standards. The Greater and Lesser Aryan Rifts are among the most dangerous regions on the planet. Both hundreds of miles long and thousands of feet deep, they are named after the island chains and subcontinents that existed before Eox's catastrophe. The site of several odd metals and strange fossils, scholars dedicated to uncovering the planet's many secrets theorize the region spawned an ecology wholly different than what existed on the planet's surface. Ancient Eoxian artifacts, radioactive metals, and rare sky metals have all been uncovered on this region. The rift sulfur springs are still incredibly active, despite the geological damage, and many different species of grubworms thrive in these sulfur pools. Besides grubworms, there are legends of larger, more imposing monsters that live in the sulfur pits, but the lack of concrete evidence of this means these sightings are just that, legends. The Thousand Moons, which is connected to Black Moon, another site of note to be discussed later, is the sprawling ring of asteroids around the planet that forms the glittering lights which are visible from the planet's surface. Created in the cataclysm which created many of the planet's other wonders and oddities, the Thousand Moons has played a role in much of Eox's history. Years before the gap, the Sarceans, natives of the two planets who fell victim to the arrogance of Eox, meant for a series of astrological bodies to be dropped on necropoli and outposts across the planet. This superweapon was never used in full force, but did threaten the planet years after the gap in 7 AG. After Eox launched the Magefire assault in their attempt to take Absalom Station, parties unknown triggered the Thousand Moons trap, thus causing the Bone Sages to abandon their attack and flee back to Eox. While many of these astrological bodies stayed in place, thanks to the combined magics of the fleeing Bone Sages, one of these largest bodies fell, at greatly reduced speed, and crushed the necropolis of Murathal, and was thus named Black Moon, and eradicating everything within 1,000 miles of the once great city. Eox's few cities known as necropoli are a vast milieu of ancient tombs, high-tech mausoleums, offices, and factories. Cities such as Orpheus and the trade zones of Lifeline are a respite from its less hospitable climate. As for Eox's few living inhabitants, the halls of the living offer a chance at fame and wealth for any brave enough to test their luck at this series of barely legal games, if you can call them games. Acting as a reality show, it is a popular form of entertainment. While its broadcasts are available to the packed world, many transmissions are outlawed on other worlds, and probably rightly so. This voyeuristic interest in living things the Bone Sages and other undead immortals of Eox can no longer experience is not a new occurrence. As in Eox's pre-gap days, Bone Sages often forced the halls of the living's denizens to act in acts of torture or erotic congress. In ancient Eox, these hopeless mortals either gave up the opportunities to escape or enjoyed privileged positions in the halls of the living as pets in gilded cages. In order to supplement the gene pool, living humanoids visiting Eox were captured in the halls of the living, an act that is surely ended today. Surely. While each deserving a log entry of their own, a short list of the most influential cities on Eox, Xenahu and its large factories of flesh vats, which produced chemically created flesh and blood used to sustain undead without harming innocents. Popular among intelligent undeads throughout the Pact World system, This synthetic flesh helps in lessening the monstrous and grotesque view held against the undead and allows them to satiate their needs without causing great harm to the living. The artificial meat created in the flesh vats of Xenahue are available in many markets across the Pact Worlds. The Spiral Basilica, center of Pharasma's faith on Eox, is located within Lifeline near Pact Port. Pharasmians and the Eternal Convocation both have a delicate agreement of tolerance to each other's presence. The priests of the Spiral Basilica offer a protective blessings to calm the minds of visitors uncomfortable with interacting with the undead. Pharasmian Crusaders also work towards dispatching rogue undead who roam Eox. This has been sanctioned by the Eternal Convocation, possibly to avoid the Crusaders from turning their eyes on the Bone Sages, thus causing a series of unnecessary and gruesome skirmishes. Pactport is the only city on Eox that is not part of the necropolis, home to around 100,000 bodies, most of whom are among the living. This domed city is designed primarily as a landing place for Pact World's trade ships and for the warehousing of Eoxian goods for export. Outside of Eox's quasi-capital city of Orpheus, Pactport is one of the largest places to purchase and install necrographs. And this does bring us to Orpheus, the largest necropolis on Eox, all of which is enclosed within a bubble of breathable atmosphere. Thus, it is the most common destination for the living of visitors outside of the Lifeline. Closest to the planetary capital that Eox has to offer, these atmospheric domes were constructed centuries ago as part of an experiment into impacting the long-term stability of potential decay of undead bodies. It has had the added and unintended benefits of attracting living tourism and a place for Pact World officials to interface with their Eoxian counterparts. Outside of a breathable atmosphere, Orpheus does little to cater to the needs of the living. However, business centers have cropped up around the opportunities of living creatures present. While creature comforts are rare, it is a major hub of necrograph trade. Orpheus serves as the seat of power to the Eternal Convocation and home to Blackwind Engineering, who develops many of Eox's starships and other technologies. While some Pact World citizens, especially the Saracens, would claim a world with a history of interplanetary war resulting in the annihilation of planets, even if done in its antiquity, should be reason enough to disallow them entrance into the Pact World Alliance, if not outright destruction by other planets in the system. There is no doubt Eox was instrumental in beating back the invasion of the Viscarium Empire, which would have been impossible without Eox's impressive military might and magics. The Bone Sages are also quick to, correctly, remind any who would object to their place in the Pact World Alliance of their defense of the system against the first attacks of the Swarm, and their being the first to sign the agreement of the Pact World Alliance, even at great cost to Eox, as much of their military forces seceded from Eox and created the disavowed Corpse Fleet. These sacrifices have so far been enough to keep most disapprovers of Eox from outright conflict. The political structure of Eox is divided into individual fiefdoms, each with its own Bone Sage master, keeping the minutiae of day-to-day infighting of the Bone Sages and their houses out of it. The masters of Eox as a whole present a powerful unified front to the rest of the Pact Worlds, preferring to be viewed as utilitarian and pragmatic and not as an evil society, as those unfamiliar with the needs of Eox would believe, swearing the days of planetary destruction is behind them, although this is a hard sell for most. Eoxian technology heavily favors the macabre in both form and function. Many technological items will incorporate bones and other various materials taken from the dead, that is then enchanted to function like a comparable item. Eoxian technology also incorporates very few safety features in their products. This is because their target consumers are usually undead and will not care if their laser gun leaks radiation or if their starship does not come with life support, and if the AI on their new computer is actually just some poor trapped soul instead of clever programming. That would be considered a feature, not a bug. The tangle of Bone Sage and corporate politics have prevented ships of Eoxian design to ever be fully offered to a wider market. Starships of Eoxian design have their place of popularity in mercenary factions and underworld cabals such as crime syndicates or smugglers, who have retrofitted these vessels and are looking to either intimidate their would-be pursuers or hoping none would bother to deal with a potentially radioactive ship crawling with magical undead. Designed for the needs of the undead who do not require radiation shielding, life support, or the comfort of living quarters, the retrofitting of Eoxian ships to be suitable for living crew members still mean these ships are a rarer sight than most designs. Even still, a combination of technology and the unique magic mastered on Eox, ships in the Eoxian design are respected for their aid in rebuffing invaders of the Vesperium and the Swarm, and feared as their widespread use among the radicals of the Corpse Fleet are a terror in wild space. Massive capital ships haunt the void of space. These battleships are in some cases built from the bones of some of the largest creatures who wander the plains, with unshielded reactors leaking deadly radiation to any living members of a would-be marauding party, and the lack of sleeping quarters and life support repel most ideas of stealing vessels of Eoxian design. This does bring a close to our glance at Eox and its history. If you would like to know more about any topics here covered, please feel free to search our archives or let me know if there is any topics you wish for me to cover or delve into more deeply. And remember to share this information with your fellow adventurers.